I came back from my sabbatical and it was really strange to come back online, post again, not really know what to say, noticing my engagement go down. I felt like I had lost a lot of momentum, where at one point I definitely felt like I was an it girl. I felt like a little bit irrelevant. You had your moment and it was doing something else. There's going to be audience that will drop away because they're not going to be interested in what you're going to do next. And there's also going to be new audience that are going to be very interested in what you do next. So I had a lot of resistance to moving forward. And I was like, I just want to make sure I get this right. I've always wanted to be a successful creative. I've always known that I wanted to do that, and I wanted to do it my way. I don't want to build deep expertise. I don't want to be an expert where people associate me with this one thing. What's really important for me is that I have my avenue for self-expression. And so for anyone that has this idea that there's this progress escalator and that you can only move forward on the escalator, and moving forward looks like more money, it looks like more customers, it looks like scale, I want you to know that you get to design the career that you want. You get to design the business that you want. And who you are and your most meaningful values and what's important to you is going to change and shift. And you need to ask yourself, what is the most important thing for me right now? Not just what does the next level of evolution look like? Welcome back to the Modern Advice Podcast. Today we are talking about navigating a business pivot and starting again. Following on from our last episode, I wanted to then talk about the what now. So, we talked about dissolving the previous business, what that looked like, why I even started to build a business that was not something that was ever going to be a long-term sustainable thing for me, my motivations. Today, we're going to talk about that void space of being in that pivot and why I am choosing to start again over just pivoting. So I came back from my sabbatical and it was really strange to come back online, post again, not really know what to say, noticing my engagement go down. I felt like I had lost a lot of momentum, where at one point I definitely felt like I was an it girl. I felt like people were really watching me. I felt like I had a lot of attention. And all of a sudden I started to feel a little bit irrelevant, and I think when you come back from a sabbatical, even if it's not that long, I've seen people take 1 year sabbaticals. I was gone for a couple months. There was still this feeling of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, like I'm not important anymore. No one cares what I'm doing. I've lost all of this buzz that I had when everyone was watching me and wanted to know what I was doing all the time. So that was a very strange feeling to grapple with. It didn't last that long. I didn't have like any major breakdowns or freakouts. It was just an interesting thing to observe and realize that, it's a very humbling experience to kind of go, oh, yeah, of course, people are going to try and find someone else to follow. People are going to look to see what people are doing that are doing things. Because at the end of the day, we love as humans to watch, follow, observe people that have momentum, people that are taking action. So if you go on a sabbatical, you're telling everyone, yo, I'm not taking any action. I'm in inaction. I'm not someone to watch. So of course they're going to disengage. And that doesn't mean that they're never going to come back. It doesn't mean that you aren't going to have another moment in time. You had your moment and it was doing something else. And you know what? There's going to be audience that will drop away because they're not going to be interested in what you're going to do next. And there's also going to be new audience that are going to be very interested in what you do next. And I think something that I learned in that break was that, you will ebb and flow, right? Life is inevitably always ebbing and flowing, and you have your moment in the sun, and then it's time for the moon to go, and you have your nighttime, and then you'll have another moment in the sun. And it's not something to fear or worry about, because the journey that you're about to embark on is going to be even more interesting and fulfilling than the previous one. So that was just an interesting thing to observe. But I did have a bit of panic set in because I was like, how am I going to make money? I don't have any offers and I don't know what offers I want to create. And that was a really sticky thing for me that I've only just arrived at clarity on recently, which I'm so happy about. But for a couple months, I was like, I really want to make sure that I'm creating things that are really sustainable, that are really in alignment. Whatever I create, that's what my brand is going to be, and that's what people are going to associate me with. That's what people are going to think about. And I have all of this brand trauma where I really don't want people to see me in a particular way. I want them to see me as an artist. I want them to see me for who I think I am and who I believe I am. And I don't want to engage in the same cycle repeating itself. So I had, a lot of resistance to moving forward. And I was like, I just want to make sure I get this right. I don't want to, end up in another 4-year loop of people seeing something else and then associating me with something else. So for context, up until recently, I had 2 main offers. One was the messaging program, which I had run for about 4 years. I've had over 1,000 entrepreneurs, students in that program. It was my bread and butter. And in October of 2023, I announced that would be the last time I would ever release that program, teach it live, host it with Q&As, coaching, feedback, audits, and that would be the last time to jump into that program. So I was never going to launch it again. That was it. In December of 2023, I announced that I was archiving the other half of my business, which was the human design for business. I archived my entire library, and that caused much more of an uproar because I actually don't know why, but people were upset. It was a whole thing. It was really strange. A lot of people were like, why would you do this? You are the leader in this niche. You've pioneered this whole category. We can't believe it. I'm so upset. What you represent, I don't know. People just had their projections and their assumptions, and it was weird. And from December, I arrived in this void space that I was in for a couple months, and I was just like, I don't know, man. I don't know what I'm going to do now. So that brings us to the next version of business. And what does that look like? I mentioned in the previous episode that, I was in this situation where I've always wanted to be a successful creative. I've always known that I wanted to do that, and I wanted to do it my way. I didn't want to build a video production company. I didn't want to be a ghostwriter. I didn't want to be close, but not quite doing the creative work that I wanted to do. And I held that really close to my heart, and I chose to take this 4-year detour to create that financial security for myself, doing something that I was skilled at and good at, but not necessarily loved with, every fiber of my being, right? I was like, yeah, cool, this is enjoyable and I'm good at it. So at the end of 2023, I grappled with feeling like a failure for not, really meeting the highest extent of my financial goals, which were really over the top, not possible, very overly ambitious. And, kind of realizing that after 4 years of aggressively pursuing financial freedom, that I'm still not fully retired and I do need to still work, right? So yeah, to try and be financially free in 4 years is pretty aggressive, and it's probably, unless you get super crazy lucky, it's probably not that possible. But hey, I tried, and we got relatively far. So what now? Where are we now? Now that I've accepted or realized that I still need to work, what do? I still need to do business, and I was sort of swirling in that for a while, being like, I was resisting for months. I was resisting, and I was like, no, I'm so close to financial freedom, but I wasn't really that close. I think in my mind, I was a lot closer than I was in reality. So there was a lot of resistance to coming out and just saying, well, I'm doing this now, everyone, this is my new niche, or this is my new pivot. This is what I'm doing, and this is my new direction. I didn't want to do that because ultimately I felt like if I came out and said, hey, I'm teaching philosophy now, or I'm teaching relationships now, that I would just end up in the exact same situation that I was in for the last 4 years. And I was like, the problem's just going to repeat itself ultimately. And I don't want to end up in the same pattern. So I haven't figured this out yet, and I want to take more time to really figure it out, I see a pivot as a change in topic. And it's not necessarily that, but that's my perception of the way that I see it. I see it as a change in subject matter. And that would be like me saying, well, for the last 4 years, I've been teaching business and I'm no longer interested in teaching business. I'm now interested in teaching human behavior, or I'm now interested in teaching philosophy or relationships. And I really, I contemplated all of these different niches that I could work in, that I could operate in. And even though I'm interested in those things, nothing ever felt 100% right in my body. I was like, yeah, I'm really I love that and I'm interested in that. But also it means that I need to get to a point where I have more mastery. And do I really want to be an expert of human behavior? Do I really want to be an expert of relationships? I don't actually want to be a relationship coach. And I was like, no, I don't want that. And so every time I thought about it, it never quite felt right. And that's when I realized it wasn't the subject matter. It's like, yeah, I could teach kink. I could teach sexuality, but that's not the point. I may as well just keep doing what I'm doing. I don't want to build deep expertise. I don't want to be an expert where people associate me with this one thing. That's where a lot of the pain comes from. And that's when I realized that what's really important for me is that I have my avenue for self-expression, and that, I can express and create things that don't fit in with, a niche, and that, I have felt creatively stifled because every time I had an opportunity to create something that was meaningful to me, I'd be like, well, my page is about marketing. And so if I talk about this other thing, it's not going to make sense and it's going to get in the way of this launch. And then that's going to affect my money and I can't afford that. So I'm just not going to express myself right now. And so for 4 years, I was really compromising on my self-expression and on my creativity. And I would still write and I would still create, but privately, and I wasn't publishing anything. And that's where there was this point of friction, is that my public persona, my public image was my business. And that was me teaching marketing. It was me teaching human design. And so me, the artist who still writes and creates things in private, but isn't publishing them because there's a conflict of brand, was like, oh, but no one knows who I really am because no one sees who I am. And I feel unseen and I don't blah, blah, blah. And I'm not expressed and I'm not celebrated in my artistry. And so then there'd be this suffering, right? And I just got to a point where I was like, I can't handle this anymore. And, I mentioned previously that this podcast is extremely therapeutic for me and I wish I'd done this sooner, but hey, we're here now. So it really comes down to me having a brand as a creative. And, this podcast was a really big solution to that I came up with in October of 2023. And I was like, this is a great idea. Now is actually the time to do this. And there were so many times where people would say you should do a podcast. Why don't you do one? But I didn't want to have a podcast where I was talking about marketing or talking about business or talking about human design. I wanted to have a podcast where I was talking about life and all of the different topics that I'm interested in. I wanted to have a podcast that was creative. So now is the right time for me to do this. Now it's in alignment. Whereas before it would have just been a business plug, for me to sell more courses. And I just didn't want to do that. Right. And podcasts are also a really great way to amplify your visibility. And I didn't want to be that visible in what I was doing before. I wanted a level of success financially, but I didn't want to explode too much, because then that would have really taken away from what I did want to be known for. So keep in mind that I'm aggressive like a bull. My Mars is in Taurus. And when I want something to pop off, it will. And I didn't want that to pop off before, and it still kind of did. So get ready. Which brings me to the quest to make money as a creative. So when I hired Amanda Bucci in, I think it was September, October of last year, to guide me through this business pivot, one of the first things that she said, I think it was in our first phone call, she was like, if you just had a business model where you could make money as an artist, you would stop trying to make courses work. This is like Mean Girls, you're like Gretchen trying to make fetch work. You need to stop trying to make fetch work. And I was like, yes, exactly. I need to make money as an artist. And then I would no longer be driving myself crazy trying to figure out what to do with business. And she's like, yeah, so just go and find an artist business model. And I was like, wait, hold on. I've been trying to do that for 14 years. It's not that there is no artist business model. It's just, it's very tricky, right? This wasn't news to me. For example, let's look at, we're going to look at the film industry, and then we're going to look at the publishing industry, because these are the two things that I'm really interested in. So film industry. In 2012, I was in the library of my university and I came across this book called Everything They Don't Tell You at Film School. And I was like, whoa, there's got to be some good shit in here. So I rented the book, read it cover to cover in a couple days, and it actually genuinely blew my mind. It is a great book. And, you know, if it wasn't written in the year 2000, I would tell every aspiring filmmaker to go and read that book. But it's very dated and the world doesn't operate that way anymore. And, you know, in 2012, it still kind of did a little bit, but we were really at the cusp of this new era that we're in now. So I grew up at a time where modern society was changing very rapidly, and now we live in the age of the internet. We also live in an age where our economy is kind of doing a weird thing. I don't want to say it's crumbling, because it's not crumbling, but it's just changing, right? And so we need to adapt to what the current climate and the current economy looks like. And ultimately, what we're seeing with our current climate is the collapse of the middle class. I'll come back to that in a moment. So what I want to do first is tell you what the book said, so you don't even need to go and read it yourself. Essentially, the way to win in the film industry, or the way to like break through in the film industry, is we have what's called film festivals, right? And so maybe you're familiar with these festivals. So an example of some festivals would be, you know, Sundance, really prominent, Cannes, Toronto, Venice, South by Southwest. And film festivals are the opportunity for any kind of breakthrough filmmaker to premiere and showcase and screen their work. It's also an opportunity for even established veterans and filmmakers to screen their work to the industry, right? And then obviously you have award shows and things like that. So as a film student, your whole game is to really try and make a short film, to then submit that short into the short section. Hopefully, you know, it gets accepted. And I mean, like, most of them don't, right? Like, it's still very competitive. You still need to be good and you still need to be very rigorous. But let's say, you know, you do everything right and, you know, you make a great short. It's actually good. It gets accepted. And all of this costs money as well. You know, it costs money to submit it. It costs money to go there. So, you know, it gets accepted. Let's say your short premieres at Sundance or at Cannes. It can't just premiere. You need to go there. And that was a really big thing that I got from the book. It was like, what a lot of people miss is that it's not about getting accepted into the festival. It's really about you as the filmmaker and your producer and, like, you know, kind of your core team. You have to go to the festival, watch it premiere, and you need to be at every single after party. You need to be at every single networking opportunity with a call card. You need to have, like, you know, back then it was like a DVD-ROM, right? Or you'd have some kind of website, show reel. And what you really needed to do, and this was the key, and this is what made the people that wrote this book so smart. You need to already have the next project that you're working on. So when you're at these festivals and you're networking with people and you go, oh yeah, you know, my film premiered, it was this one. And they go, wow, I loved it. That's amazing. They'll say, like, oh, what are you working on now? And you go, oh, wow, you know, my current project or my next project is this. And you want to have the pitch deck for your next project ready to go, because ultimately those networking opportunities are the opportunity for you to get investment and funding into that next project. And that's kind of the game. So you always want to be working on something. You always want to have some kind of pitch, whether it's off the ground or not. You want to have your one pager ready to go. You want to have the core of it, the screenplay at least. Because ultimately, these people are looking for an opportunity that they can invest into, you know, and you want to meet with distributors and things like that. So sometimes you can sell it after you've premiered it, but it is really hard to sell a project and get distribution. It's not just like a given. You know, like, I have a friend who made a really incredible documentary, self-funded, a couple $100,000 of that project, got Red Bull to fund the rest, premiered it at a festival, still doesn't have distribution. And it's a great film. So you're not always going to get distribution. You might still be out of pocket. And here's the thing, right? You've just spent $200,000 of your own money funding your own project, and you just may never get that back. And so filmmaking is a very, very expensive industry to try and break into if you're not Steven Spielberg's niece. You know, like, we can't all be, the fucking cousin of someone. So you do need to have your own capital to fund your own projects, even if they're shorts. Shorts can still be expensive to make. We're talking like, to make a good short, you probably need, back when I was a student, it was like $15,000 to make something. And so you want to adjust for inflation, right? Like I think if you really want to get a good crew together, you probably want to put aside like $20,000 to $30,000 to make something these days. So that's the game, right? But things have changed. And so here's how it's changed. The other day, I caught up with a buddy of mine that I went to film school with, and he is an amazing cinematographer. He actually won the green card lottery, and so he moved to LA a couple of years ago. He's working out there, and he knows the ins and the outs of how the industry works. And so we're having this really amazing conversation about that. And he was like, yeah, well, what's happening now is that it's really hard for indie filmmakers to break through. And I was like, yeah, tell me more about that. And he's like, well, big studios, and he worked for Lionsgate for a while as well. So he was like, big studios don't take bets on unestablished people like they used to. In the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s, people like big studios were still allocating a lot of budget to up and coming directors that had maybe made a short, or maybe they'd made like an indie full length, but they were basically backing them, people that looked like they had talent and a good work ethic, people that had a great personality. And they were saying like, here's, $4 million, go and make Jaws for the first time. Like, here's your breakthrough role. Here's $10 million, go and make E.T. Like, people were getting a shot with a decent budget to do something that they could actually create and it could have legs. But now what we're seeing in the industry is the major studios aren't really betting on up and comers anymore because of where the economy is, right? Like, we're not in the golden era anymore. We're in a weird time. And so, you would have noticed this. If you pay any attention to cinema, that what we see now is this imbalance of Marvel and films that are built on IP. So for example, you have Barbie, you have anything that is established. And when it's established, so it's like Jurassic Park, you have, a series, right? Where it's like, okay, now we're making the sequel to Spider-Man. Now we're making, it's a franchise. So we have a lot of films that come out in franchises, Twilight 3, whatever. And the reason why they do that is because when they're investing, $100 million, $200 million, $500 million into these blockbusters like the next Avatar, which is horrible, it's because they want things that are commercially viable. And studios don't want to take risks on up and coming artists that may or may not produce something that is going to make money for the studio. And at the end of the day, the film industry is a business just like anything else. And so when you have Barbie, people, whether it's a good film or not, people are still going to see it because it's Barbie. Whether the story for the new Jurassic Park is good or not, people are still going to see it because it's Jurassic Park. And that's the effect, it's like they don't really care if they're making good art. They don't really care if they're challenging, conventions or genre or structure. What they care about is commercial viability. They care about their bottom line. So, there's all of this money that's going into horrible shit that makes money. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the up and comers and the indies that are trying to break through, and maybe they get like a $1 million budget max. And, the films premiere at Sundance, so they premiere at these like, indie festivals, and then nothing happens to it afterwards because no one buys it. And then that's it, so there's nothing really in the middle. And it's been that way for a while. I want to say maybe at least 10 years. I want to say it doesn't just happen overnight, right? Like, I think that this is like something that happens over time. But definitely, I think in the last 10 years, I've really observed it and been like, where are the good films? Like, why aren't people making any good shit anymore? Like, Quentin Tarantino is a really good example of someone that was like defying and blending and experimenting with genre, and Miramax really invested in Tarantino's career and in his development. And, we don't really have someone like that anymore. We don't have the next generation of Tarantinos. It's not there because there's no one backing and investing in those people. So what we do have now is the rise of new studios, and there's also a disruption in general, which is like that Amazon and Apple and Netflix are making their own things. And, you know, I think that that's something to pay attention to. I think the rise of Apple TV is going to be really interesting. It's already interesting, but that's a conversation for another day. Let me know if you're interested in knowing more about that. A24 is now one of the most, you know, I guess like talked about studios in Hollywood because they are working in that middle section where they do have that more medium level budget. And a really good example of a film that came out from A24 is Everything Everywhere All at Once, which everybody loved. Was like, that was weird, that was cool, it was quirky, you know, loved the story, and it had a decent budget, so it was made quite well. I think it was like 20 something million. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, where it's like, you know, there were some established actors in there, Michelle Yeoh, but also a lot of breakthrough actors and people that weren't so recognized, right? And a lot of just like kind of up and comers. And so I think when you have something like that, where it's like you have a few people that are sort of recognizable, but there's a nice amount of budget, it's not crazy, that's where you have really good stuff. And that was definitely like the breakthrough movie of 2022, and it won a ton of awards. That's the kind of stuff that we want to see more of, right? But, you know, we don't have a lot of studios investing into that. So anyway, people take safe bets. That's really the premise of the story there in the film industry. And it's also something that pervades through into other industries, like the publishing industry. So let's take a look at that. Now, the publishing industry, because I'm a writer of books, you know, it's really important to examine this. And, you know, I've done a lot of due diligence here as well. You have the 5 big houses. You have Hachette, HarperCollins, Macmillan, Penguin, and Simon & Schuster. Something that happens a lot in the publishing industry is that you will have agents, book agents, that work to, you know, present things to the houses. And they'll say, you know, I've got this great manuscript, I've got this good query letter, proposal, da da da. But often agents will work with people that they already know. You know, they'll work with a lot of their friends, family, network, etc. And someone commented to me last year that even now, a lot of the books that get published, it's either the same people publishing, you know, because they already have the relationships, they already have the credibility and the status, but it's rare to see breakthrough authors. It's not as bad as the film industry, but it definitely is rarer now than it was 20, 30 years ago to see these breakthrough authors. Why is that? And so, you know, you have a lot of garbage that's being published and you're just like, what the fuck is this? Like, no one, like, it's horrible. So where is that garbage coming from? Well, the garbage is coming from the agents who are giving the proposals of people that they know because they're just betting on who they know. It's all a game of like handshakes and, well, you know, my cousin and my neighbor who are in the game, right? It's very hard. It's not impossible. It's very hard to break through. And here's why it's hard to break through in the publishing industry, because let's say you do get a deal with one of the major houses, right? Which is, you know, you can get a deal and like it's not impossible to get a deal. It's not hard to get a deal. You can get a deal. But even if you do get a deal with a big house, they're not going to give you the marketing budget required to get your book super visible where it's actually going to make a lot of sales, because they have a certain amount of budget and they allocate the majority of that budget to the people that they know are going to make money. So they give that budget to their A-listers, you know, to the people like Britney Spears and Pamela Anderson when they release their memoirs, because it's commercially viable. And they know that if they put that on a billboard, if they put it, you know, like in the press release and they pay for the ad slots, whatever, then, you know, they'll sell a lot because they have star power. And so if you're a breakthrough writer, guess what? You're probably not going to end up with Eat, Pray, Love because they're not going to push you. And so if you're an up and comer, like, you can get published, but the likelihood that you're going to end up building a really incredible career in writing where you actually get paid as a writer is very unlikely. Again, not impossible. It's just that here's how the system is built and here's how it works and here's why it is the way that it is. You know, like I had to look into this because I was like, how do I do this, right? And I will leave no stone unturned. So I've seen people break through, and it is possible, obviously. I think, for example, you know, every generation you get like a J.K. Rowling or a Sarah J. Maas, and, you know, it is possible. It's just very, very unlikely. Like, there can only be one Beyonce and one Taylor Swift. You know, everyone can't achieve that level of sales and that level of like fandom, you know? So it's not that we have a lot of people in the middle. It's that we have a few people at the top. And that's kind of the nature of the game. And you do need to have connections in order to make a lot of sales. Like, you kind of need to be friends with Reese Witherspoon so that she can talk about you on the book club, and if you don't have those connections to be able to share to their mailing list of, 500,000, hey, I really recommend this book, or to their TV show of millions of viewers, you're probably not going to make those millions of sales that you need to actually make the money for it to be a real career. That's the thing, right? Is that we have, okay, so let's take aside traditional publishing and we go the other two tiers. Then you have hybrid publishing and you have self-publishing. And, a lot of people are self-publishing, and that's great. A lot of positives and negatives to that. A lot of people will talk to me about self-publishing when I tell people I want to be a published author, it's really funny to hear, people jump in and think that they know everything about publishing. And I'm like, you don't really know. Or you just don't really realize how intense this is, and it's a big game. And also, this is about a lot more than just like publishing something. Like, this is my life's work, this is a very big deal for me. Like, if I wanted to, I could just publish something on Amazon myself and it would cost nothing, right? But that's not the point. The point is that I do want to be a Cheryl Strait. I do want to be Elizabeth Gilbert, and I think that I could be. And so it's really about playing your cards, not right, but playing them very strategically, so that you set yourself up to be in the best possible position to do so. And there's a lot of strategy that is involved in that. There's a lot of personal branding. There's a lot of, navigating the game in the industry and making sure that you don't, mess up, right? Like, there's believe me, it's like playing chess, you really need to be careful. So back to where we were about making money. So if you self-publish, you could be selling 100,000 copies, a couple 100,000 copies to be making decent money as an author. If you are traditional publishing, you need to be selling millions of copies to be making money as an author because of the split of how you get paid. So if you're self-publishing, you own 100% of the rights. So whatever you sell, you get back immediately. If you are published by a house, even a hybrid, you will maybe get a percentage, right? So here's the thing. If you're published by a big house, you'll probably get somewhere in the vicinity of like 15%. And, this is obviously up for negotiation. It's a range, right? It might be 10%, it might be 20%, but on average, I'd say it's probably around 15% is what you get in terms of royalties. So, if you sell a book for $30, you get 15% of that $30. So for every book that you sell, you really only get like $4.50. So you really need to sell a lot of copies, right? With a hybrid publisher, which is that intermediary option, the split is usually reversed. So you get majority share. So you still don't get 100, but maybe you get like 50, maybe you get 70, maybe you get 85. It really depends on the deal, all of that. But you get a little bit more. You get a lot more profit that way. So that's hybrid. Now, here are the different nuances between the three. If you self-publish, you do not qualify for any bestseller lists. So immediately when someone talks to me about self-publishing, I'm like, get out of my face, because you don't understand why this is important to me. And it would be very hard, again, not impossible, but very hard to be in physical bookstores if you self-publish. There's a lot of sacrifices with self-publishing. So it's like, okay, you have a much lower barrier to entry where it's like, it's easy to do it, but you also don't ever get to be a New York Times bestseller. You don't ever get to be a Wall Street Journal bestseller. You don't ever get to really play the game of like having that be your career. It's usually people that self-publish are people that just want to build their brand, for their business, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's a different strategy for a different person. And that's not my strategy, and that's not what I want to do. So if you are wanting to be in physical bookstores, you really want to go with a hybrid or a traditional house. Now, as I mentioned, if you're an up-and-comer, it actually doesn't make that much sense. I mean, this is also, keep in mind, this is all just my personal perspective, and this is how I've arrived in my decision-making process. If you're making 15% on every sale, but they're not pushing you and you're not getting marketing budget, you still need to do the majority of the marketing and the selling. So if you already have a really big audience and you have like hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, whatever, then you're probably still going to make a lot of money. A really good example of someone that did this is Dan Bilzerian. Dan Bilzerian, if you're a follower of mine, you probably won't know who he is. Because his followers are like usually like cis male, and they tend to be a little bit more, it's like, not values aligned to the type of people that would follow me. And the only reason I know who Dan Bilzerian is because my ex was a fan of him, and I was like, who? And he showed me, and then it became this funny thing, and it became a joke with some of my friends. So Dan Bilzerian is one of those people that you don't really know why he's famous, and then you kind of have to like look into it, but he's kind of famous for being famous. He's one of those people that people follow him because he has this like crazy luxurious lifestyle. He has so many followers on Instagram. I wouldn't even know, like maybe hundreds of millions. And his lifestyle is just like girls, private jets, jet skis, doing crazy shit all over the world. It's like a lot of just orgies and drugs and like crazy playboy living, right? He's basically famous for being a playboy. And, he did have a background as a professional poker player, which is how he sort of came into his money. But, and he has a vape business and other enterprises. But my point is that he has a huge audience, and he released a book, print on demand, and because of his audience, he can sell that, and he doesn't need budget, to push that and market it and get sales. And also he already has money, so it doesn't really matter for him anyway. But that's just an example. So if you want to make money out of it, then there's obviously different ways you can go about it, right? It depends how much capital you're working with, but capital is required somewhere, whether it comes from you or someone else. So, I am planning to allocate a certain amount of money into a marketing budget so that I can promote my books with Amazon ads, with PR, with maybe some billboards, and with placements and going on podcast tours and, building my own platform. And I think that this podcast will also help with that eventually. And I do have some audience, but I don't have anywhere near the level of audience as of this current date for me to be making a ton of money from book writing. So if you're getting 15% versus, let's say, like 70%, that's something to consider, right? Like, what is going to be more worthwhile for you, and how do you want to play that? And really, you're taking a big bet on whether or not your book is going to be the next Eat, Pray, Love, or whether it's going to be the next Atomic Habits. Like, it may or it may not be. And I think everyone wants to be the next Elizabeth Gilbert. Everyone thinks that their book is going to be, the next Eat, Pray, Love. And I can tell you that that thinking is so common. So many people write that in their proposals that if agents see that and, like, people who like Eat, Pray, Love are going to love my book, they're probably not even going to look at it because everyone just thinks that they're so special and that their book is going to be the next one. So that gives you an idea of like how competitive this is. Again, it's not impossible. You just need to have a strategy if you really want to do this. And so, kind of like to think of myself as a bit of a Sun Tzu, very strategic in my game playing of how I want to create what I want to create. In my quest to figure out how to make money from books, I have gone down a lot of different avenues. I've talked to a lot of different people for a long time, and I've learned how these different industries work. And something that really annoyed me is that every time I would talk to really established people about how to make money from books, they would always say the same thing. And they would say, yeah, well, you just need to have a high ticket offer on the back end. Like, you need to have like a course or a group program or coaching that you can sell. Like, do you sell coaching or consulting, or do you have a program? And I was just like, I already did that. I want to make money from the books, not from the coaching. And so it just became this very circular thing, where even with speaking, people would be like, yeah, you got to pitch something from stage. You got to have an upsell. And I'd be like, I don't want to have an upsell. I just want to make money from my art. So ultimately, all of this led me to my recent breakthrough, which funnily enough occurred as I was preparing for this very episode just last week. So I was in Sydney with my best friend Carly talking about this whole dilemma of, my quest to make money as an artist, and balancing that quest with this pivot that I'm in business, where I'm realizing that I still need to work and I don't really want to work because I just want to be an artist. And she turned to me and she said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you think about your current business like it's your job while you create your side hustle, which is your art, then it just gets to be your safety net. We're so conditioned to think that business has to be like perfect and fulfilling, and actually it can just be your ticket to freedom without it having to be your be all and end all for living. And she was like, John Grisham and Elizabeth Gilbert had their jobs for years before they ended up quitting and actually just being full-time writers. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. Yes. I remembered something really, really important. I remembered that a couple months prior, I was on my phone and this magical synchronous thing happened. You know that feature in the iPhone where it says, memories like on this day or like previous trips, and it kind of just like recommends different photos in your albums? So in December, when I was swirling in my chaos of this whole dilemma, my iPhone recommended this photo. And the photo was a screenshot from Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic. And at the time, I was like, whoa, this is the message that I needed to read today. That's crazy that my phone did that. My phone is amazing. Oh my God, this is like a incredible manifestation. Like, wow, my phone, I'm powerful. Oh my God, I'm such a miracle. And I was just like, oh, so great. And then I was like, oh, I remember that, I've forgotten, I need to go back and I need to revisit that. And so then I started looking at Big Magic because I was like, the answer is in Big Magic. So then I went back and I reread Big Magic from cover to cover. And I want to read you a section because it's so relevant and it's so good. And really, it's this section on the importance of not relying on your art to make a living, which leads us to our big breakthrough. So I'm reading from Big Magic. Elizabeth Gilbert says about someone that wanted, their creativity to become their job. And she goes, at the time, mind you, I wasn't being published either, and I was hungry too. I would have loved to have all the same stuff that he wanted: success, reward, affirmation. I was no stranger to disappointment and frustration, but I remember thinking that learning how to endure your disappointment and frustration is part of a job of a creative person. If you want to be an artist of any sort, it seemed to me, then handling your frustration is a fundamental aspect of the work, perhaps the single most fundamental aspect of the work. Frustration is not an interruption of your process. Frustration is the process, the fun part. The part where it doesn't feel like work at all is when you're actually creating something wonderful and everything's going great and everyone loves it and you're flying high. But such instances are rare. You don't just get to leap from bright moment to bright moment. How you manage yourself between those bright moments when things aren't going so great is a measure of how devoted you are to your vocation and how equipped you are for the weird demands of creative living. Holding yourself together through all the phases of creation is where the real work lies. I recently read a fabulous blog by a writer named Mark Manson, who said that the secret to finding your purpose in life is to answer this question in total honesty. What's your favorite flavor of shit sandwich? What Manson means is that every single pursuit, no matter how wonderful and exciting and glamorous it may initially seem, comes with its own brand of shit sandwich, its own lousy side effects. As Manson writes with profound wisdom, everything sucks some of the time. You just have to decide what sort of suckage you're willing to deal with. So the question is not so much what are you passionate about? The question is what are you passionate about enough to endure the most disagreeable aspects of the work? Manson explains it this way. If you want to be a professional artist, but you aren't willing to see your work rejected hundreds, if not thousands of times, then you're done before you start. If you want to be a hotshot court lawyer, but you can't stand 80-hour work weeks, then I've got bad news for you. But if you love and want something enough, whatever it is, then you don't really mind eating the shit sandwich that comes with it. If you truly love having babies, for instance, then you don't care about the morning sickness. If you truly want to be a minister, you don't mind listening to other people's problems. If you truly love performing, you will accept the discomforts and inconveniences of living on the road. If you truly want to see the world, you'll risk getting pickpocketed on a train. If you truly want to practice your figure skating, you will get up before dawn on cold mornings to go to the ice rink and skate. My friend back in the day claimed that he wanted to be a writer with all his heart, but it turns out that he didn't want to eat the shit sandwich that comes along with that pursuit. He loved writing, sure, but he didn't love it enough to endure the ignominy of not getting the results he wanted when he wanted them. He didn't want to work so hard at anything unless he was guaranteed some measure of worldly success on his own terms. Which means, I think, that he only wanted to be a writer with half his heart. And soon enough, he quit, which left me hungrily eyeballing his half-eaten shit sandwich, wanting to ask, are you going to finish that? Because that's how much I loved the work. I would even eat somebody else's shit sandwich if it meant that I got to spend more time writing. The whole time I was practicing to be a writer, I always had a day job. Even after I got published, I didn't quit my day job just to be on the safe side. In fact, I didn't quit my day job, or my day jobs, I should say, until I had already written 3 books. And those 3 books were all published by major houses and were all reviewed nicely in the New York Times. One of them even had been nominated for a National Book Award. From an outside perspective, it might have looked like I'd already made it, but I wasn't taking any chances, so I kept my day job. It wasn't until my 4th book, and that book was freaking Eat, Pray, Love, for heaven's sake, that I finally allowed myself to quit all other work and become nothing other than a writer of books. I held on to those other sources of income for so long because I never wanted to burden my writing with the responsibility of paying for my life. I knew better than to ask this of my writing, because over the years I have watched so many other people murder their creativity by demanding that their art pay the bills. I've seen artists drive themselves broke and crazy because of this insistence that they are not legitimate creators unless they can exclusively live off their creativity. And when their creativity fails them, meaning it doesn't pay the rent, they descend into resentment, anxiety, or even bankruptcy. Worst of all, they often quit creating at all. I've always felt like this is so cruel to your work to demand a regular paycheck from it, as if creativity were a government job or a trust fund. Look, if you can manage to live comfortably off your inspiration forever, that's fantastic. That's everyone's dream, right? But don't let that dream turn into a nightmare. Financial demands can put so much pressure on the delicacies and vagaries of inspiration. You must be smart about providing for yourself. To claim that you are too creative to think about financial questions is to infantilize yourself. And I beg you not to infantilize yourself because it's demeaning to your soul. While it's lovely to be childlike in your pursuit of creativity, in other words, it's dangerous to be childish. Other self-infantilizing fantasies include the dream of marrying for money, the dream of inheriting money, the dream of winning the lottery, and the dream of finding a studio wife, male or female, who will look after all your mundane concerns so that you can be free to commune with inspiration forever in a peaceful cocoon, utterly sheltered from the inconvenience of reality. Come now. This is a world, not a womb. You can look after yourself in this world while looking after your creativity at the same time, just as people have done for ages. What's more, there is a profound sense of honor to be found in looking after yourself, and that honor will resonate powerfully in your work. It will make your work stronger. Also, it may be the case that there are seasons when you can live off of your art and seasons when you cannot. This need not be regarded as a crisis. It's only natural in the flux and uncertainty of a creative life. Or maybe you took a big risk in order to follow some creative dream and it didn't quite pay off. So now you have to work for the man for a while to save up money until it's time to go chase your next dream, and that's fine too. Just do it. But to yell at your creativity saying, "You must earn money for me," is sort of like yelling at a cat. It has no idea what you're talking about, and all you're doing is scaring it away because you're making really loud noises and your face looks weird when you do that. I held on to my day jobs for so long because I wanted to keep my creativity free and safe. I maintained alternative streams of income so that when my inspiration wasn't flowing, I could say to it reassuringly, "No worries, mate. Just take your time. I'm here whenever you're ready." I was always willing to work hard so that my creativity could play lightly. In doing so, I became my own patron. I became my own studio wife. So many times I have longed to say to stressed out, financially strapped artists, just take the pressure off yourself, dude, and get a job. There is no dishonor in having a job. What is dishonorable is scaring away your creativity by demanding that it pay for your entire existence. This is why whenever anyone tells me they're quitting their job in order to write a novel, my palms get a little sweaty. This is why when anyone tells me that their plan for getting out of debt is to sell their first screenplay, I'm like, yikes. Write that novel. Yes, definitely try to sell that screenplay. I hope with all my heart that good fortune finds you and showers you with abundance. But don't count on the payoff, I beg of you. Only because such payoffs are exceedingly rare, and you might very well kill off your creativity by holding it to such a harsh ultimatum. You can make your art on the side of your bread and butter job. That's what I did for 3 whole books. And if it hadn't have been for the bananas success of Eat, Pray, Love, that's what I'd still be doing now. That's what Toni Morrison did when she used to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning in order to work on her novels before going to her real life career in the publishing world. That's what J.K. Rowling did back when she was an impoverished single mother struggling to get by and writing on the side. That's what my friend Ann Patchett did back when she worked as a waitress at TGI Fridays and wrote in her spare hours. That's what a busy married couple I know does, both of them illustrators, both of them with full-time jobs, when every morning they rise for a full hour before their children awake to sit across from each other in their small studio space and quietly draw. People don't do this kind of thing because they have all kinds of extra time and energy for it. They do this kind of thing because their creativity matters to them enough that they are willing to make all kinds of extra sacrifices for it. Unless you come from landed gentry, that's what everybody does. When I read that, I realized that I wasn't so special. My fears were the same as everybody else's. My excuses were the same as everybody else's. And I needed to just get on with it. There was an acceptance that this is just the way that it is. And this is the way that it is for everybody. And I'm actually just making it so much harder for myself by resisting what is kind of inevitable. And I'm just perpetuating suffering for myself by demanding that I need time and money to do this thing that people make endless sacrifices for. And I calmed down a lot. And probably if I read that sooner, it wouldn't have sunk in the way that it did last week. I was ready to read that. I was ready to have that epiphany, and I was ready to accept. I was ready to no longer fight and splash and kick and scream. And I also realized that I was in a very unique position where most artists would have a day job doing something. I don't know what Elizabeth Gilbert was doing. I don't know what her day job was, but maybe their day job is they work in an office and it's not a public facing thing. You know, maybe they're a barista, maybe they're a bartender, you know, maybe they have some kind of administrative clerk role, but it would be unlikely that you were also public facing in some way and a personal brand in some way, right? And so I realized that I had something that defined me in the public eye. I didn't have a job. I had accidentally built a career. And so much of my suffering and my torment came from me lamenting that, you know, the world sees me and I'm publicly known for this thing that I was just kind of doing to like survive, but then I accidentally became great at it and I didn't mean to. I was just trying to make money, but now what if that interferes? And I don't know. I created this like identity crisis that I was in for a while that I'd only recently gotten out of, which I'm so happy about. But that led me to kind of ask, you know, like what is the difference between a career and a job? So according to dictionary.com, a job is a post of employment, whereas the definition of a career is an occupational profession, especially requiring special training followed as one's life's work. And that's where the problem came. I was like, but this isn't my life's work. And yet it has accidentally become that. And that's what created this other problem that I had been trying to solve for myself. So then I Googled, can you have multiple careers? And it says that you can adopt multiple concurrent careers for a host of reasons, including economic, such as poverty or striving for additional wealth, educational, such as multiple degrees in multiple fields, or personal, such as interest or a lack of fulfillment in one career. And then I came across the term multi-potentialite. And Google says that that is used interchangeably with polymath or Renaissance person. One need not be an expert in any particular field to be a multi-potentialite, or as we would say, a jack of all trades. And then I remembered when my previous creative mentor, Yona Robinson, a poet, turned to me one day and she said, Phoebe, you are a Renaissance woman. And I was like, yeah. When you look at it that way, which I had never done before, I'd never really thought about it from this perspective. I was like, I'm obviously a polymath. And I remember, learning that word for the first time at a DiMartini conference in 2018 and thinking about the idea of that. But at that time, I think I didn't see myself as an expert or with a level of mastery in multiple fields. I saw myself as someone that had a lot of interests, but no mastery. Whereas now, what I'm really seeing is that I have developed a lot in a multitude of ways, but definitely in two concurrent fields, at least. Some of the greatest minds in history were polymaths. Leonardo da Vinci, Aristotle, Galileo, Copernicus, Michelangelo, Benjamin Franklin, Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla, amongst others. And the moment that I saw myself as a polymath, my identity crisis miraculously dissolved. Which brings me to two trains theory. So back to the conversation with Carly, where she said, you could look at your business like it's a job while you're working on your creative side hustle, which is your art and your books. So two trains theory is a really incredible concept that I love to share with people who are aspiring to leave their 9-to-5 and start a business or, start something creative. So my other mentor, Neil Strauss, actually wrote about this in a blog post, and I'm going to read that to you because it's better when things come directly from the horse's mouth in this case. People often wrestle with leaving their current job to pursue something more meaningful to them. Maybe they're not happy with their current job. Maybe they don't want to work for a boss anymore and they want to be self-employed. Maybe they just want to do something true to their passion and themselves. So think of your current job as one train. Think of what you really want to do or what you want to do next as another train. Right now, you're standing on a moving train, which is your current job. And what most people do is they get off their current train, exit onto the station platform, and they wait for the next train. But usually what happens is they get stuck there and eventually they start running out of time and money as the trains and the platforms around them just whiz right past. To return to the non-metaphorical reality, they've underestimated the incredible amount of work required to get themselves to a level of success, satisfaction, and financial stability in the new job. And soon most of them find themselves very unhappy, returning to their old jobs or doing things sometimes that they like even less for money, and having little to no free time to pursue their new direction. So if you want to follow the two trains theory, stay on the train that you're currently on, and then in whatever spare time you have, work to get to the other train started. Then in whatever time you have, work to get the other train started. Start pursuing your new passion or new direction or passive income stream on the weekends, in the evenings, early in the morning, whenever you can. Get that train moving faster and faster and find out if you even like being on it. If you do, you'll find that your energy will automatically redirect to fueling the engine of that other train. Pretty soon it will be up, rolling, picking up speed, and one day you'll realize that it's going almost as fast as your current train, if not faster. And that's when you just take the simple step from your current train to your new train with no waiting at the platform, no fear of having to let go, no fear of having to go backward. You may have to straddle the two trains with one leg on each for a little, but that's a quality problem to be so in demand. And that brings me to my final point about this, which is that it's not just a metaphor. It's always easy to get a new job when you already have one. You have much more value to those in your new career if you have to be stolen or poached from another job rather than being plucked out of the unemployment line. Just like in the game or any reality show, when women are competing for you, you are less needy, have higher perceived value, act more confident, and are more likely to succeed. Simple, right? I've seen it happen time and time again. In most cases, if you do this, not only will your life be easier, but so will your chances of success. I've seen this for myself in a multitude of ways. I mentioned in our previous episode about all of the intangible things that I've gotten from building my brand and how those things have actually helped and accelerated my career as a writer. And so, by building a platform, building an audience, even though my career as a business coach or as a teacher of marketing or content, even though I feel like that's totally different from my career as a writer, one has actually helped the other. And I've been really surprised to see how building that brand and building that influence and also attaining those resources has dramatically helped me, which is why I have no regrets in doing so. Even though, there's been a substantial amount of pain and anguish, I think that that's just the inevitable price that we pay for pursuing our dreams. So in conclusion, for those of you who are potentially wondering, what's Phoebe going to do now? What's this new business direction? To bring it back to the very beginning of the episode, which is that I have made a decision to not pivot into a new topic and just ultimately do the same thing, but to start again. What does starting again look like for me in business? Well, I don't want to live launch big giant group programs anymore, because what I want to do is I want to take my two careers now that I've accepted them wholeheartedly and realized that, this is the nature of reality and, it's actually quite humbling. It's pretty cool. I want to put the majority of my time, energy, and effort into my writing career. And I want to spend probably 3 or 4 days a week working on my books, on the podcast, on, filmmaking projects and ideas. And then I want to spend 2 days a week on my other career, and rather than do business coaching or, teaching, what I'm going to do is something very straightforward. I'm going to treat it as more of a job. And so, I've talked about the cash flow quadrant, and I've talked about the 4 different archetypes of employee, self-employed, business owner, and investor. I'm actually going to take a little maneuver back from business owner into self-employed, which means that I am going to willingly trade time for money, which for a very long time I had a lot of resistance to, because I had this very linear idea in my mind about how I wanted to be free. And when you trade time for money, you're never really free. So I was like, okay, well, I actually just want to prioritize the simplest thing, because if I'm making this transition and this jump onto the other train, then I don't want to risk being pulled in a million different directions, which when you are a business owner and you're focusing on systems and people and team, you are inevitably going to be pulled in a million different directions. Oh, the funnel. Oh, this team member is quitting. Oh, it's just a lot of stuff at any given time. This is changing, that's changing. Whereas when you're self-employed and you're not trying to make yourself redundant and free of the business, it's just a lot more straightforward. It's a lot more simple. So I was like, you know what? I am going to relaunch my consulting services, and I'm going to focus on my area of expertise and my genius, which is in communications. It's brand storytelling, positioning, anything to do with communications, content strategy, anything like that, marketing strategy, where I can do that consulting for established business owners. And yeah, I'm going to be taking a massive pay cut because, there's no way that I'm going to be making, 7 figures a year working one-on-one as a brand consultant. But I don't need to do that because that's not my priority. My priority is, moving on to this other train and having this balance between these two trains and not falling off, And so it's again, just this lesson that money is not the most important thing. And maybe you're in a season of life where it is really important. And I was in that season for 4 years. And now I'm in a season of balancing these two careers, these two trains, and on just really living in a very simple way where I'm doing what I love, and that's filling the majority of my time. And I'm focusing on building my skill set and on developing more mastery. So my rebuild, or my next directions, are now to do the consulting stuff. And I'm really excited about that. It's something that makes a lot of sense. And if you don't have the context, it could look like a step back, but it's not. It never is. And so for anyone that has this idea in your mind that there's this like progress escalator and that you can only move forward on the escalator, and moving forward looks like more money, it looks like more customers, it looks like scale, I want you to know that the idea of an escalator in your career is fucking bullshit. Just like the idea of an escalator in relationships is bullshit. You get to design the career that you want. You get to design the business that you want. And who you are and your most meaningful values and what's important to you is going to change and shift. And you need to ask yourself, what is the most important thing for me right now? Not just what does the next level of evolution look like, or what does the next bit of growth look like, because that is an illusion. And that's another way that society games you into making decisions unconsciously that you're not really making for yourself. So I hope that this episode was not only a great insight into my mind and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, but also I hope it was like a lot of really big permission for you to, you know, let yourself off the hook if you don't want to scale, if you don't want to grow. I hope it's reframed for you what progress looks like. And for anyone that wants to start something of your own or wants to make a change, I hope that it's given you the practical steps to thinking about how to do that in a realistic way without being all or nothing, giving everything up and saying you're going to quit and you know, jump and take the leap, but actually just being very, very pragmatic and going, you know what? We live in a very real world with financial demands, and I need to be responsible. And there's no dishonor in that. There's no dishonor in being responsible, you know? So I'm so happy to have shared this episode with you. I think this is probably my favorite one to date. I can't wait to hear what you think. Make sure you share all of your feedback with me on this episode and let me know what you want to hear about next.